Dawn arrives quietly in the Japanese countryside. Not with fanfare, nor with the clash of steel, but with a slow, almost reverent unfolding of light. A pale sun lifts itself above low, mist-covered hills, its rays filtering through cedar and pine. Dew clings to blades of grass like tiny mirrors, reflecting a sky still unsure of its own color, half indigo, half gold. Somewhere beyond the trees, a rooster crows. The sound travels across rice fields and narrow dirt paths, dissolving into the fog. A solitary figure moves through this landscape. His straw sandals are worn thin. His kimono, patched and faded, hangs loosely from a body hardened by years of travel. Two swords rest at his side, not polished, not ceremonial, but tools shaped by use. One long, one short. Daisho, the mark of a warrior. Yet there is nothing ostentatious about him. He pauses near a stream. The man kneels, scoops water with roughened hands, and washes his face. The cold shocks him awake. He exhales slowly, eyes closed for a moment, as if measuring the coming day. This is not the morning of a lord in a castle. This is not the morning of a soldier awaiting orders. This is the dawn of a man who belongs nowhere and everywhere. This is Miyamoto Musashi. Not at the moment of a duel, not in the instant of killing or victory, but between. Between battles, between legends, between the stories history prefers to tell. When people speak of Miyamoto Musashi, they often imagine a single image: a flawless swordsman, a wandering demon of combat, an intouchable warrior who lived only for duels and death. This image is seductive and incomplete. The popular myth paints Musashi as a man permanently poised on the edge of violence, drifting from fight to fight, defined solely by the blade. Films, novels, and even modern martial arts culture reinforce this idea. Musashi as an eternal warrior, living only for combat. But history, when examined closely, tells a more complex story. Musashi fought approximately 60 recorded duels, many of them before he turned 30. These encounters are dramatic, brutal, and rightly famous, yet they account for only a fraction of his life. What then filled the long spaces between those moments? What did Musashi eat? Where did he sleep? How did he survive financially? What occupied his mind during the long afternoons when no opponent stood before him? The truth is both quieter and more revealing. Musashi was not constantly fighting. He was walking, observing, studying, thinking, and above all, adapting. The legend of Musashi is forged in combat, but the man himself was shaped in solitude. To understand Musashi's daily life, we must first understand the world he walked through. Musashi was born around 1584 during the final years of Japan's Sengoku period, an era defined by near-constant civil war. For over a century, the country had been fragmented, ruled by competing warlords, where survival often depended on loyalty, strength, and timing. But by Musashi's adulthood, Japan was changing. The Battle of Sekigahara in 1000 marked a turning point. Tokugawa Ieyasu emerged victorious, laying the foundation for the Tokugawa shogunate, which would bring relative peace for over 250 years. This transition created a paradoxical world for warriors. On one hand, samurai were still revered as the military elite. On the other, large-scale warfare was fading.
thousands of trained fighters suddenly found themselves without battles to fight. Some became bureaucrats, some became teachers, some became bandits, and some, like Musashi, became ronin, masterless samurai, untethered from clan or castle. A ronin lived in uncertainty. No stipend, no guaranteed shelter, no protection. Yet this rootless existence also offered something rare in feudal Japan: freedom of movement. Musashi walked this narrow line between danger and autonomy, moving through provinces, villages, and cities, navigating a society that was stabilizing but still deeply stratified. Contrary to romantic portrayals, Musashi was not wealthy. Historical records and later accounts suggest he often lived close to poverty. He carried few possessions. He relied on temporary lodging, temple hospitality, the generosity of patrons, or simple shelters along the road. And yet, he was never invisible. A man bearing two swords drew attention. A man rumored to be undefeated drew fear. Villagers watched him cautiously. Officials evaluated him silently. Other swordsmen measured him with their eyes. Musashi's reputation followed him like a shadow, sometimes opening doors, sometimes closing them. This constant awareness shaped how he lived day to day. He could not fully relax. He could not fully belong. Even in peace, he lived as a man prepared.
Musashi's true residence was the road. The major highways of early Edo period Japan, such as the Sanyo-do and Nakasendo, were more than trade routes. They were arteries of culture, information, and rumor. Along them flowed merchants, monks, messengers, entertainers, and warriors like Musashi. Walking these roads meant exposure to regional dialects, local fighting styles, religious practices, tools, weapons, and crafts. Musashi absorbed everything. He watched farmers work the land. He observed carpenters shaping wood. He studied the posture of monks and the grip of soldiers. Nothing was wasted. Everything became part of his understanding of strategy, not just in combat, but in life. Musashi did not fully belong to any class. He was not a peasant. He was not a retainer. He was not a monk, though he often lived like one. This liminal existence shaped his philosophy. Later, in the Book of Five Rings, Musashi would write about seeing the world clearly, without attachment. These ideas did not emerge in isolation. They were forged during countless ordinary days, walking dusty roads, sharing simple meals, sleeping under uncertain roofs. The legendary swordsman was also a man who endured hunger, loneliness, and doubt. And it is in these unrecorded hours that the true Musashi begins to emerge.
Miyamoto Musashi did not wake to the sound of temple bells or the footsteps of servants. There was no fixed hour. He rose with the light or with the cold. Sometimes he slept in the corner of a rural inn, sharing space with merchants and pilgrims. Other mornings found him under the eaves of a shrine, wrapped in a thin cloak, the smell of wet earth rising around him. On rare occasions, a local lord or martial school offered him a room, but these were exceptions, not habits. Sleep was light. A ronin learned quickly that deep sleep invited danger. Theft, harassment, or unwanted challenges were real possibilities. Musashi often slept with one hand close to his swords, not out of paranoia, but practicality. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he did was listen. Wind in the trees, footsteps, voices, animals. Awareness came before movement. Musashi did not believe that mastery of the sword began with the sword. Morning was for the body. Historical interpretation of the Book of Five Rings and later commentaries suggest Musashi valued natural, functional strength rather than exaggerated muscularity. His training did not resemble formal dojo routines. Instead, it blended seamlessly with daily life. He stretched slowly, rotating shoulders stiff from travel. He walked barefoot when possible, strengthening balance and foot sensitivity. He practiced squats and lifts using stones, water buckets, or fallen branches. There were no repetitions counted aloud, no mirrors, no audience. Every movement was purposeful. Modern sports historians have noted that such training aligns with what we now call proprioceptive conditioning, training the body to understand itself in space. Musashi was centuries ahead of terminology, if not practice. Contrary to expectation, Musashi did not spend every morning swinging steel. In fact, excessive sword practice was something he warned against. He preferred substitution, a stick instead of a blade, an oar when near water, a wooden training sword carved by his own hand. This approach reduced dependence on specific tools and prevented overfamiliarity with a single weapon. In open fields or forest clearings, he practiced footwork, short steps, long lunges, sudden changes in direction. He visualized opponents rather than needing them physically present. This habit, later echoed in his writings, reflected a broader principle. Strategy is not bound to form. Morning was also when Musashi thought, not in the abstract philosophical sense we imagine today, but in practical reflection. He replayed past encounters. He analyzed mistakes. He questioned assumptions. There was no paper most days, no ink. Thoughts were held, tested, and released. Buddhist influence, particularly Zen, permeated this mental discipline, not as dogma, but as method. Musashi was never formally ordained, yet he absorbed Zen's emphasis on presence and non-attachment. Silence was not emptiness, it was rehearsal. Food in the morning was uncertain. If he stayed at an inn, he might receive a simple meal, rice gruel, pickled vegetables, perhaps miso soup. If he slept rough, breakfast might be nothing more than water from a stream and leftover rice wrapped in cloth. Meat was rare. Fresh fish depended on location. Most days were dominated by carbohydrates, rice, millet, barley. This diet, though modest, aligned with what modern nutritionists identify as high-endurance, low-fat sustenance. Combined with constant walking, it kept Musashi lean, resilient, and alert. Hunger was common, but not feared. Musashi later wrote that reliance on comfort weakened judgment. Hunger sharpened it. Morning was also when Musashi encountered others. Farmers heading to fields, monks collecting alms, children staring openly at his swords. He was not talkative. Accounts describe him as blunt, sometimes abrasive, often indifferent to politeness. This was not arrogance, it was economy. Words, like movements, were used only when necessary. Yet he observed constantly. He noticed how people stood, how they carried tools, how they reacted to strangers. Every human interaction was data. While direct diaries of Musashi's daily life do not exist, historians cross-reference Edo period travel records, temple lodging customs, samurai training manuals of the era, agricultural schedules tied to sunrise. Archaeological findings from roadside inns and shrines confirm the sparse conditions described in contemporary texts. Musashi's lifestyle was not unique, but his use of it was. He turned constraint into curriculum. As the sun rose higher, Musashi gathered his few belongings. He tightened the cord of his sandals, adjusted the weight of his swords, chose a direction, not always with certainty. Morning did not end with clarity. It ended with motion. And so he walked. By midday, Musashi usually led toward people. Villages thickened, paths widened. The smell of smoke and cooked rice replaced that of wet grass and pine. The afternoon was when isolation gave way to friction, when a solitary man crossed into the structured world of society. Musashi did not enter towns casually. A ronin carrying 2 swords was always a disruption. Guards at gates watched him closely. Shopkeepers lowered their voices. Children followed at a distance. The presence of a masterless warrior carried ambiguity, protection or danger, honor or trouble. Musashi accepted this tension without protest. He moved through crowds like a stone through water, slow, deliberate, causing ripples without intention. Feudal Japan was built on hierarchy and loyalty. To belong was to be protected. To wander was to be suspect. Musashi had no lord. This made him free, but also politically exposed. Local officials often questioned his intentions. Samurai in service sometimes viewed him as an insult to order itself. Yet, Musashi rarely sought confrontation. Contrary to legend, most afternoons passed without violence. Duels were not spontaneous street brawls. They required permission, witnesses, or at least mutual recognition. Musashi understood the unspoken rules. He avoided drunken soldiers. He left towns before dusk if tension rose. He declined invitations that smelled of trap or spectacle. Strategy for him extended far beyond the sword. Musashi needed to eat, to travel, to live. Without a stipend, he relied on irregular sources of support, temporary patronage from local lords intrigued by his reputation, teaching short-term martial instruction, creating art, ink paintings, calligraphy, small carvings, wagered duels, though these were rarer than popular culture suggests. Records from later Edo period collections attribute several surviving sumi-e paintings and wood carvings to Musashi. These were not hobbies, they were means of sustenance. Art was portable wealth. A scroll could buy meals. A carving could earn shelter. This versatility reveals Musashi not as a romantic drifter, but as a man who understood value in many forms. Afternoons were also the most dangerous time. Martial schools were active. Students trained openly. Word traveled quickly when an unfamiliar warrior entered town. Challenges did not always come as formal invitations. Sometimes they came as insults, sometimes as tests of posture or gaze, sometimes as silence. Musashi often declined. This refusal baffled others. Was he afraid? Arrogant? Neither. He believed that fighting without strategic necessity was wasteful. Victory meant little if the conditions were wrong. When he did accept, it was rarely impulsive. He observed his opponent first, days, sometimes weeks. He learned their habits, their temper, their teachers. The duel itself was merely the final punctuation. Ironically, it was in these quiet afternoons that Musashi's legend grew most rapidly. Rumors thrive in uncertainty. He defeated a master without drawing his sword. He sleeps outdoors even in winter. He never bathes. He paints as well as he fights. Each town added embellishment. Musashi did nothing to correct these stories. A man who does not explain himself becomes a canvas for imagination. By his 30s, Musashi was already more story than person to many who spoke his name. Much of what we know about Musashi's movements comes from domain records noting visits by notable ronin, martial school genealogies, temple registries listing guests, later compilations such as the Niten-ki. Archaeologists studying Edo period towns confirm the social tension around unattached samurai, especially during early Tokugawa peace when weapons were increasingly symbolic rather than necessary. Musashi lived at the edge of relevance, neither obsolete nor fully embraced. As the sun began its descent, shadows lengthened across streets and fields. Musashi made decisions: stay or leave, speak or remain silent, accept hospitality or sleep alone.
Afternoon was the time of choice, and Musashi chose movement more often than comfort.
Writing about Miyamoto Musashi means navigating absence. Unlike feudal lords or monks, Musashi left few personal records. No daily diary, no official post, no household archives. What remains is fragmented. Later biographies, martial school records, temple registries, his own philosophical text, the Book of Five Rings. Historians must work like archaeologists, reconstructing a life from shards. Written near the end of Musashi's life, circa 1645, Go Rin no Sho is not autobiographical. It is instructional, yet it reveals his lived reality indirectly. Musashi emphasizes adaptability over form, practicality over elegance, experience over theory. These priorities reflect a man shaped by instability and self-reliance. The absence of ritual in his writing mirrors the absence of comfort in his life. The Niten-ki, compiled decades after Musashi's death, remains one of the most cited sources. While containing embellishments, it preserves consistent themes. Constant travel, minimal possessions, artistic production alongside martial practice. Cross-referencing with domain records confirms Musashi's presence in multiple regions, supporting the image of a wandering existence. Excavations of Edo period inns, hatago, roadside shrines, and rural dwellings reveal conditions consistent with Musashi's described lifestyle. Sparse sleeping quarters, shared spaces, minimal privacy. Artifacts such as worn straw sandals, wooden eating bowls, and travel cloaks match descriptions found in contemporary texts. Musashi lived as many did, but with heightened awareness.
Several ink paintings attributed to Musashi survive today, including depictions of birds, fish, and abstract forms. Art historians note economy of line, emphasis on movement, absence of ornament. These qualities mirror his martial philosophy. Art was not escape, it was continuation. Studies of itinerant Edo period figures, monks, craftsmen, performers, provide insight into Musashi's routines. Seasonal travel patterns, reliance on temples, informal economies. Musashi's difference lay not in lifestyle, but in intentional refinement. We know Musashi wandered. We know he fought. We know he wrote, painted, carved. We do not know his private emotions. We do not know his regrets. We do not know his fears. History gives us structure. Imagination fills silence. Acknowledging uncertainty does not weaken the story. It strengthens it. Musashi's life was not myth made flesh, but flesh resisting myth.
Early Edo period Japan valued order above all else. After generations of war, peace was fragile and enforced. Social roles hardened, behavior became codified, appearance mattered. Musashi existed at odds with this system. He embodied discipline without conformity. He rejected luxury not out of rebellion, but efficiency. In a culture obsessed with ritual, Musashi practiced function. The technology of Musashi's world was not advanced, but it was refined. Steel was expensive. Tools were maintained meticulously. Objects lasted decades. Musashi understood tools as extensions of intent, not symbols of status. His preference for wooden swords, Dokkōdō, reflected both practicality and philosophy. Technology did not replace skill. It revealed it.
Musashi participated in rituals where necessary, but did not depend on them. He visited temples. He respected shrines. He observed etiquette when it served harmony, but he avoided empty repetition. His spirituality was experiential, not institutional. This made him difficult to categorize and difficult to control. Painting, calligraphy, sculpture, these were not contradictions to martial life. They were expressions of the same principles: balance, timing, negative space, decisive movement. Musashi's art reveals a man who saw no boundary between creativity and survival.
The Edo diet was simple, seasonal, and repetitive. Musashi ate what sustained movement, not indulgence. This economy of consumption mirrored his economy of action: nothing wasted, nothing excessive. Samurai society demanded loyalty. Musashi offered competence. This mismatch kept him marginal, yet margins are fertile. There, ideas survive scrutiny. As Japan stabilized, warriors became administrators. Musashi became something else entirely: a generalist. In modern terms, he was adaptable, interdisciplinary, resilient. Musashi cannot be reduced to swordsmanship. He was a product of culture and a critique of it.
When the name Miyamoto Musashi is spoken today, it often arrives already wrapped in thunder, undefeated, invincible, peerless. But when the duels fade, when the blades are sheathed and the crowds disperse, what remains is silence. And in that silence stands a man, not a myth. A man who woke without certainty, who walked without destination, who lived without guarantee. This was the true arena of Musashi's life. Legends simplify. They sharpen complexity into symbols. They turn people into lessons. Musashi's legend tells us how to win. His life teaches us how to endure. Between his victories were thousands of unremarkable hours, walking, waiting, watching, choosing restraint over reaction. It was in these moments that his philosophy was forged, not in triumph, in repetition. The world Musashi walked no longer exists, but the conditions he faced remain familiar: uncertainty, displacement, rapid change, the collapse of old structures. Musashi lived at the edge of an era when old skills were losing their place and new roles were not yet defined. So do many today.
Musashi's greatest weapon was not the sword. It was adaptability. He learned across disciplines. He survived without dependency. He cultivated clarity amid instability. Modern research in psychology, systems thinking, and resilience echoes this truth: those who adapt endure. Musashi embodied this centuries before language caught up. To create was not luxury, it was necessity. Art fed him, observation protected him, silence sharpened him. Creativity for Musashi was not expression alone, it was survival strategy. The solitary path is not lonely. Solitude is often mistaken for isolation. Musashi's path was solitary, but not empty. It was rich with attention, discipline, and meaning. He belonged not to a clan, but to a practice. Musashi does not ask us to fight duels. He asks us to pay attention, strip away excess, adapt honestly, act decisively, accept uncertainty without collapse. These are timeless skills. At the end of his life, Musashi retreated to a cave, Dokkōdō, and wrote his final thoughts. He did not build a school around himself. He did not seek comfort. He left instructions, not monuments. The road did not end. It passed forward.